It's a dark, stormy night. The rain pounds the streets as the Grand Hotel stands tall, its golden lights flickering in the distance. She's been through it all. But tonight, everything changes. Ma'am, this place isn't for people like you. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She had just walked into a place that had no respect for her. They didn't know who she was, who she truly was, but she wasn't going to let their words affect her. Not yet. She stood there, drenched, every inch of her body screaming exhaustion. But there was something deeper inside her, something they couldn't see, something that would change everything. Every laugh, every mocking whisper from the guests, it only fueled the fire burning inside her. She wasn't just a victim anymore, no, she was about to make them all regret this moment. The clerk's smug face twisted in satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. But what they didn't know was that Emma was no stranger to humiliation. The manager's cold eyes scanned her from head to toe, as if she were beneath him. His voice was filled with scorn as he addressed her. His words cut deep, but Emma wasn't shaken. She had walked through worse, faced more than this. She knew something. She knew it was all part of the plan. Whispers, hushed voices. The guests, they watched her closely now. They didn't see the storm that was about to hit. They didn't see the fury hidden behind her calm exterior. She remained silent. The anger, the pain, the humiliation, it was all there in her eyes. But she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing she was affected. Emma knew. She knew that this wasn't just a bad moment. It was a setup, a trap they'd walked right into. The pieces were falling into place. But for now, she wouldn't say a word. She wouldn't reveal what she knew. The tension was building. The game was far from over. They didn't know. They didn't realize what they were dealing with. This wasn't a simple encounter. This wasn't a random humiliation. No, Emma had a plan they would never see coming. Her mind raced, but her face remained emotionless. She had learned a long time ago that sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon you can wield. And in that silence, Emma knew something they didn't. They couldn't know it. They couldn't understand it. But she was about to teach them all a lesson they'd never forget. I hope you're not planning to stay long. This place is for people who belong, not for, well, whatever it is you are. He didn't know it yet, but Emma was already several steps ahead. She had something in her back pocket, a secret that would turn this entire situation on its head. For now, she let them laugh, let them talk, let them believe they had the upper hand. But soon they'd realize how wrong they were. She was no longer a victim. She wasn't going to play by their rules. The tables were about to turn, and when they did, it would be too late for anyone to stop her. From the vehicle steps a man, not just any man, a giant in his own world, tall, charismatic, with an air of dominance that made everyone in the room freeze. Gasps echo through the room. The staff, so eager to laugh at Emma, now stand frozen in fear. The same clerk who mocked her now pales at the sight of the man who has just entered. The manager, who had dismissed Emma with a sneer, stands rigid. The clerk, once full of arrogance, now looks as if he's seen a ghost. Then his gaze lands on her. Emma, the woman who had been ridiculed, the woman who had been humiliated. But in his eyes, there was no pity, no judgment, only recognition. The air shifts. It becomes thick with tension. The staff, once so bold in their ridicule, now shrink back in the face of this man. He walks slowly, purposefully, as if he's the only one who matters in this room. Without a second thought, he asks the question that shatters the silence, that freezes the very air around them. Alexander, did anyone lay a hand on you? The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. The staff, the manager, the clerk, they were all too stunned to respond. They had no idea what was happening. But Emma, she knew. Alexander, this is my wife. The words hit like a thunderclap. A silence falls over the room so thick it could suffocate. This man, the one who was nothing short of a legend in the business world, was claiming Emma as his own, his wife. It's as if the ground beneath their feet has been ripped away. The arrogant manager, the mocking clerk, and every guest in the room, all of them now understood the gravity of the situation. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. The once helpless woman whose dignity had been trampled just moments ago was now standing next to the most powerful man in the room. No, in the entire hotel. No one had seen this coming, Alexander. You think you can humiliate her? You think you can treat her like this? The staff is paralyzed. The realization dawns on them slowly, each second dragging like an eternity, their mockery, their arrogance, everything. They thought they knew about Emma was wrong, so wrong. And Emma, she wasn't just standing there as his wife. No, she was standing there as someone who had been underestimated, humiliated, and now, in this moment, she was finally being seen for who she truly was. In a single moment, the narrative had been rewritten. The weak, vulnerable woman who had been humiliated, whose spirit had been shattered, she was no longer the prey. She was now the predator. Alexander Carter had flipped the script. The power had shifted, and in that moment the game was over. The players were no longer who they thought they were. And the staff? They would soon find out how wrong they were to cross Emma. The room, it was silent. Not a single word, not a single sound. It was as if the very air itself had been sucked out of the room. The staff, once so eager to humiliate Emma, now stood paralyzed in fear. The manager, who had looked at Emma like she was nothing more than dirt on his shoes, now looked as though he had seen a ghost. His face was pale, drained of color, as the weight of the situation began to hit him. And the clerk, the one who had laughed at Emma, who had mocked her at every turn, now stood with his jaw slack, his body rigid in fear. He had thought he was untouchable. He had thought he could do whatever he wanted, but he was wrong, so wrong. And then, without hesitation, Alexander Carter spoke. His voice, smooth yet deadly, rang out in the silent room. Alexander, you're both fired. Effective immediately. The words hit them like a freight train, fired just like that. In an instant, the two men who had once held all the power, who had ridiculed Emma without a second thought, were nothing but discarded pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And the silence that followed? It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the palpable weight of power. The shift in the room was undeniable. The room was in chaos, but in that chaos there was a clarity. Alexander had taken control, he had laid down the law, and now the power rested in his hands. But it wasn't just Alexander's power that had shifted the room. No, it was Emma's. Emma, once the nobody, the woman who had been laughed at, dismissed, humiliated, was now the most powerful person in the room. And the change wasn't just in her standing next to Alexander. No, the change was in her very being. The woman who had been overlooked, who had been dismissed, was now standing at the center of it all. She was no longer the prey, she was the predator. She was the one in control. The shift in power wasn't just about Alexander's arrival. It was about Emma's rise. In the span of mere moments, she had gone from being the object of ridicule to the woman who stood tall in the face of everything they had thrown at her. Alexander, you will leave. Now. The manager and clerk knew better than to argue. They knew that any word, any plea, would only make it worse. So they did what they had to do. They left, and with their departure a new reign began. And as the doors to the hotel swung open, the last traces of arrogance, of power, of pride, everything they had once taken for granted, left with them. But the real power shift wasn't in what Alexander had done. No, the real shift was In Emma, the woman who had once been nothing more than a victim was now the one with all the power. And the room, it was silent once more, but this time the silence was filled with respect, with awe, and with a newfound understanding that Emma was no longer the weak one in the room. This was her moment, her time to shine, and no one would ever be able to take that away from her again. As the chaos of the past moments fades into the background, Emma walks forward, the weight of her transformation clear in every step she takes. No longer a woman hiding in the shadows, no longer a victim. She was walking towards something new, something hers. And as she steps into the suite, it's as if she's finally stepped into her true life. The life that had been waiting for her all along. The life of power, of respect, of dignity. Alexander, you deserve this, Emma. In that moment, Emma understood something she hadn't before. That sometimes true power isn't just in the battles you fight or the victories you win. It's in the way you carry yourself after everything you've been through. She had been torn down, but now she was the one who built herself back up, and nothing could take that away from her. And as Emma takes her place in the lap of luxury, the ones who had mocked her, who had thrown their ridicule at her like stones, are now the ones who have been cast into the storm. The rain pouring down on their heads is the only thing that offers any kind of relief. The manager, who had once looked at Emma with nothing but disdain, now finds himself standing in the middle of a cold, unforgiving storm. His confidence is gone, his arrogance washed away by the downpour. He is nothing now, nothing but a man, stripped of his power, cast out into the world, with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. The clerk, too, is left to face the harsh reality of his choices. The man who had laughed at Emma's expense, who had reveled in her discomfort, is now standing in the rain, his reputation ruined, his pride shattered. It's a cruel irony, isn't it? How the very people who had humiliated Emma now find themselves trapped in the very same storm they once thought she deserved. Emma, the woman who had been cast out in the cold, the woman who had been left to drown in her own shame, was now sitting in warmth. Her enemies, the ones who had tormented her, were now the ones left in the storm. The balance of the world had shifted, and Emma was finally in control. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had raged inside Emma. But now the storm was over. The world had turned, and the people who had once looked down on her were now paying the price for their arrogance. And as they walk away, drenched and broken, they realize the lesson they should have learned long ago. Arrogance always leads to regret. Remember this. Arrogance always leads to regret. The ones who belittle, the ones who mock, one day they will fall, and when they do, it will be swift, it will be harsh, and it will be a lesson they will never forget. And Emma, she was no longer just a woman. She was a force that nothing and no one could ever break.